Hello friends, welcome to the HFY Ode, where we bring you the new science fiction stories for you, and new adventure, new world.
They didn't send their diplomats first. They sent their warriors. And their warriors were women. And every species in the known galaxy stepped back, except us. We didn't step back. We didn't even blink. That was the first mistake they made about us. It wasn't the last. The Varek had a word for humanity. It didn't translate cleanly into any Earth language, but the closest approximation, according to the 3 xenolinguists who'd spent 8 months wrestling it into English, was something between shelf creature and the ones who almost made it. Not cruel exactly, more clinical. The way you describe a species that had developed fire and then spent the next 100,000 years nearly burning itself to nothing with it. The Varek were not cruel people. They were, however, very confident ones. Ambassador Thessaly Vorn stood at the observation deck of the Conclave station and watched the human delegation's shuttle approach through the viewport. She had her arms folded behind her back in the traditional posture of formal assessment, a posture that translated in Varek body language as I am measuring you and finding the measurement adequate, but not surprising. Around her, the other conclave representatives held their own postures of polite waiting. The Cathay envoy, iridescent of second morning, had arranged its bioluminescent frills into the pattern that meant amused curiosity. The Dalhari cluster mind hummed at a frequency Thessaly's translator rendered as mild interest. The Cerati delegation stood in their customary formation, 7 feet tall, pale as pressure-formed bone, utterly still, and expressed nothing because expressing nothing was the Cerati way of expressing that they were watching very carefully. The human shuttle docked. Thessaly had studied human files for 3 months before this assignment. She knew the averages. Height, modest. Lifespan, short. Regenerative capacity, negligible. Sensory range, embarrassingly narrow. The humans couldn't see into infrared, couldn't hear subsonic frequencies, couldn't detect electromagnetic fields. They navigated the universe through approximately 5 senses, 2 of which were, by galactic standards, roughly as useful as antennae on a rock. They had arrived in their little corner of the galaxy, one unremarkable yellow star, one unremarkable blue-green planet, about 400,000 years ago in their current form. They had been spacefaring for less than 200 of their years. In the grand ledger of the conclave, humanity was a footnote that hadn't yet decided what sentence it belonged to. The airlock cycled. The first human through was a woman. Medium height, brown skin, close-cropped hair gone silver at the temples. She wore the dark uniform of Earth's diplomatic corps with a kind of ease that suggested she'd slept in it before and would again. Her eyes, dark, unhurried, moved across the assembled delegates with the specific quality of attention that Thessaly's files had flagged as threat assessment, disguised as curiosity. Humans did that, apparently. Looked relaxed while cataloging exits. Behind her came 5 others. 3 women, 2 men, all wearing the same unhurried expression, all moving with that same quality of comfortable in their own skin that Thessaly had noticed in every piece of human visual media she'd studied, and still couldn't quite parse. Even the tallest among them, a man with the broad shoulder build of someone who'd spent years doing something physical for reasons other than combat, moved like he wasn't trying to take up space. Like he was comfortable in exactly the amount of space he occupied. Varek warriors moved differently. Every Varek warrior, male or female, young or ancient, moved with the conscious performance of capability. You announced yourself with your body. You made clear, with every step, exactly what you were capable of, and therefore what it would cost any observer to miscalculate you. Humans, as far as Thessaly could determine, didn't perform anything. They just were. She found it deeply unsettling and couldn't explain why. Ambassador Vorn. The silver-haired woman extended her hand in the human gesture of greeting. Open palm, vulnerable wrist, fingers together. Every xenoanthropologist in the conclave had written at least one paper about that gesture. The vulnerability was the point. I show you I am not holding a weapon, offered first, before any reciprocal display. Thessaly touched the offered hand briefly, in the manner of her own people. Ambassador Chun, she said, on behalf of the conclave of aligned species, welcome. Thank you. Lien Chin smiled. It reached her eyes. Thessaly's threat assessment subroutine, which she ran without thinking anymore, clocked it as genuine, not performed. It's good to finally be in the same room. Finally. As though the decades of delay in granting humanity conclave access had been an inconvenience rather than a policy. Thessaly filed the word away. The formal reception lasted 4 hours by conclave standard time, 7 by Earth reckoning, which the human delegation absorbed without complaint. They ate what was offered. They asked intelligent questions. They laughed at the right moments, which was either natural charm or extremely good briefing, and Thessaly couldn't determine which. What they didn't do, and this was what she noted most carefully, was ask for anything. Every new species that entered conclave proceedings asked for things in the first meeting. Trade routes, protection agreements, information sharing. It was expected. It was in fact how the conclave calibrated a new species' priorities and therefore their threat level. What you asked for first was what you needed most. What you needed most was where you were weakest. The humans asked for nothing. Ambassador Chin spoke warmly about the honor of attending. She expressed genuine interest, or performed genuine interest at a level indistinguishable from the real thing. In Cathay luminescent art, in Dalhari collective memory architecture, in the Sarati concept of stillness as language. She shared 3 things about Earth, unprompted: the existence of a mountain range called the Himalayas, the fact that humans had a musical instrument that was just a box of tightly strung wire that you hit with small hammers, and a joke about the relationship between coffee and human cognition that made even the Dalhari cluster mind vibrate with something its translator rendered as reluctant amusement. At no point did she ask for anything. At no point did she indicate weakness. Thessaly found this more unsettling than anything else about them. The Varek had not always been the most powerful species in the conclave. There had been a time, 6,000 years ago, in their history, when they had been the newcomers. The footnotes species. The ones whose ships were a little smaller, and whose alliances were a little thinner, and whose place at the table had been granted with the polite condescension of those who expected you to be grateful. They had fought their way to prominence the hard way, which is why Thessaly understood, from the inside, what it looked like when a species was doing the same. She reported to Conclave High Command that night. Secure channel. Encrypted, the full weight of her 3 months of preparation behind every word. The human delegation, she wrote, does not behave like a species seeking admission. They behave like a species that has already decided to be here and is allowing us to manage the paperwork. Recommend elevated assessment protocol. High Command responded within the hour. Assessment noted. Maintain standard diplomatic engagement. The humans have no military presence beyond their home system. They're not a threat vector. Thessaly read the response twice. Then, she filed it under things I was told that later proved incorrect, and went to bed. The challenge came 6 weeks later. It didn't come from the conclave. It came from the Varek warrior caste, specifically from Commander Sareth Vel, who was 7 feet of muscle and certainty and had never, in 40 years of decorated service, been wrong about anything she'd assessed in the field. The warrior caste didn't attend diplomatic functions as a rule. They attended when the conclave needed something demonstrated. When a new species needed to understand, physically and viscerally, what the galactic power structure actually looked like beneath the courteous language of formal proceedings. The human delegation had been on conclave station for 6 weeks. They'd sat through 47 sessions of formal negotiation. They'd signed 17 preliminary accords. They'd impressed everyone in rooms with soft lighting and careful language. Commander Vel didn't do soft lighting. She walked into the neutral gymnasium on Deck 9, a space the conclave maintained for exactly these purposes, with 11 of her warriors behind her, and a translator unit on her belt, and the specific kind of confidence that comes not from being told you are powerful but from spending your entire life proving it. Ambassador Chun was already there. She brought two people. Just two. Her aide, a young man named Roshan who had the build of someone who ran long distances for reasons he'd never fully explained, and a woman named Yael who carried herself with the specific quality of "I've been in worse rooms than this," and walked out of all of them. Vel looked at Chun. Chun looked at Vel. "I'll be honest," Chun said, in her unhurried way. "I was wondering when this would happen." The translator rendered it accurately. Vel's eyes narrowed by 3 millimeters, which in Varic facial vocabulary was the equivalent of raised eyebrows and a dropped jaw. "You expected this challenge." "I expected a challenge," Chun said. "You wouldn't be doing your job if you hadn't." Vel studied her for a long moment. Thessaly, watching from the observation gallery above, felt the specific chill of watching two people who were both correct about different things occupy the same space. "The Varek warrior caste," Vel said, "extends to the human delegation the formal challenge of assessment. This is not aggression. It is evaluation. We assess all species who seek conclave membership. We need to understand what you are capable of, how you fight, what you are willing to do." She paused. "We have found that words describe a species poorly. Bodies describe them accurately." Chun was quiet for a moment. "Then who fights?" "One of mine against one of yours," Vel said. "Non letal. Full contact. The outcome determines nothing politically. It determines everything practically." She met Chen's eyes. "We want to know what human beings do when it hurts." The room was very still. Chen turned to Yael. Yael was already rolling up her sleeve. Her name was Yael Dagon. Thessaly pulled her file in the 20 seconds between Chen's glance and Yael's first step forward, because Thessaly was always pulling files, always measuring, always trying to solve the equation of a person before she had to face them across anything that mattered. What the file said: 34 years old. Former military, Israeli Defense Forces, 6 years active. Then 10 years doing something that her file described as security consultation in the particular way that security files describe things they don't want to fully describe. 163 centimeters tall. 61 kilograms. Against her, Commander Vel's warrior, who stepped forward from the 11. Her name, Thessaly's translator offered, was Dara. She was 220 centimeters. 140 kilograms of Varek muscle, which was denser than human muscle. The Varek homeworld had a gravity that ran 30% higher than Earth standard, and 40,000 years of evolution didn't disappear just because you were standing somewhere more comfortable. Dara had fought in 3 wars. She had a scar that ran from her left temple to her jaw that she'd never had repaired, which in Varek culture meant she was proud of it, which in Varek culture meant she'd won the fight that gave it to her in a way that was worth remembering. Yael looked at her. The look was not afraid. It was not performed confidence either. It was the look Thessaly realized of someone doing math. She's doing math, Thessaly thought. She's looking at a warrior twice her size who has fought in 3 wars, and she is doing math. "Ready?" Vel asked. "Give her a second," Chun said. Yael stood still for exactly 4 seconds. Then, she said in Hebrew, her translator hadn't been switched on, something that her aide Roshan quietly rendered for the room as, "She's going to come in high. Big reach advantage. Don't let her get a grip." She was talking to herself. Then, she switched her translator on, looked at Dara, and said, "Okay, let's go." What happened next lasted 6 minutes and 43 seconds by Conclave Standard Time. Thessaly watched every second of it. She watched Dara come in high, exactly as Yael had predicted, with the terrifying efficiency of a warrior who had spent 40 years perfecting the use of her own reach advantage. She watched Yael not block it, because you don't block something moving at that speed and force if you weigh 61 kilograms, but redirect it using the Varek warrior's own momentum with a precision that suggested she'd calculated the angle before Dara had even moved. She watched Yael take hits. Real ones. The kind that, on a human body, made sounds that turned the stomach. Twice she went down. Twice she got up. Not dramatically. Not with the roaring defiance you saw in Varek warrior stories. Not with the elegant recovery of Serity martial forms. She got up the way you'd get up from a stumble. like the floor was just inconvenient. She watched Yoel lose ground for 4 minutes, and then, in the space of 40 seconds, do something that made every Varrock warrior in the room go very still. She'd been losing, deliberately. Thessaly understood it the moment it happened. The way a pattern suddenly reveals itself not at the first data point, but at the 20th, when you finally have enough to see the shape. Yoel had been losing on purpose. She'd been absorbing hits, mapping them, cataloging every pattern in Dara's fighting style with the specific patience of someone who was willing to bleed for information. And then she'd used it. 6 minutes and 43 seconds. When it ended, Dara was on the floor, not unconscious, but not getting up, staring at the ceiling with an expression that Thessaly, who had cataloged thousands of Varrock facial expressions, had never seen before. It was the expression of someone recalibrating everything. Yael stood above her, breathing hard, bleeding from a cut above her eye. One hand pressed to her ribs in a way that suggested something wasn't happy in there. She extended her hand. The same gesture Chun had offered at arrival. Open palm, vulnerable wrist. Dara stared at it. Then she took it. The room was absolutely silent. Chin's aide Roshan, quietly, under his breath, said something his translator rendered as, "Yeah, that tracks." Commander Vel stood very still for a long moment. Then, she looked at Ambassador Chun. "She took damage she didn't need to take," Vel said. It wasn't an accusation. It was the voice of someone trying to understand a calculation they hadn't accounted for. She had openings earlier. She didn't take them. She needed information more than she needed a quick win, Chun said. Vel was quiet. She bled for information, Vel said. She bled for a better win, Chun said. There was something in her voice when she said it. Not pride exactly. Not performance. The matter-of-fact tone of someone describing how water is wet, as though the willingness to absorb pain in exchange for understanding was simply a human feature, like the coffee thing, like the hammer piano, just another fact about the species that you should probably write down. Vel looked at her warriors. Her warriors looked back. Thessaly, up in the observation gallery, very quietly opened a new file on her datapad. She titled it, Things I Was Not Briefed On. She had a feeling it was going to be a long document. The fight between Yael Dagon and Commander Vel's warrior Dara got watched 600,000 times in the first 48 hours after someone leaked the station's internal footage to the galactic feed. Thessaly knew it had been leaked. She didn't know by whom. She suspected it had been leaked by someone Varrock because the Varrock had an entire cultural tradition around sharing combat footage when the combat contained something worth learning, and the 47 hours of silence from Varrock High Command following the match had been the silence of an organization doing very rapid, very serious reassessment. She watched the galactic feed's response with the specific dread of someone watching a slow disaster from a safe distance. The KFAA philosophical networks, organisms that communicated through bioluminescent pattern rather than language, and who had spent 12,000 years developing theories of physical-emotional integration in combat, lit up in cascades of amber and violet that the translation algorithm struggled with, eventually rendering as something between we did not know this was possible, and we need to reconsider the category. The Dalhuri Clustermind issued a formal statement that was by Dalhuri standards, practically shouting, Asterisk, the humans do not optimize for winning. They optimize for understanding. These are not the same thing. We find this significant. Asterisk, the Cerati said nothing. The Cerati never said anything. But 3 senior Cerati tacticians who had been planning to leave Conclave Station in 4 days quietly extended their stay by 3 weeks. Ambassador Chun watched all of this from her office on Deck 7. Eating something called a peanut butter sandwich and drinking coffee from a thermos she'd apparently brought from Earth, and looked, Thessaly thought, observing her through the brief gap of a courtesy visit, like a woman who had seen this movie before and already knew the second act. You knew this would happen, Thessaly said. She'd stopped cushioning her observations with diplomatic language around Chin somewhere in week 3. It felt dishonest in a way that made her teeth itch. I knew something like it would happen, Chin said. She offered Thessaly half the sandwich. Thessaly declined. The offer was noted regardless. There's always a moment where someone wants to see what we actually are rather than what we say we are. That's not unreasonable. We do the same thing. Your species challenges other species to combat. Not formally. Chin took a bite. We just watch how they react under pressure. Everyone does. Yours is just more honest about it. Thessaly sat down in the chair across from Chin's desk. Uninvited, which would have been a protocol breach with any other ambassador, and which Chin acknowledged only by pushing the coffee thermos slightly closer to Thessaly's side of the desk. The Conclave will want a full assessment now, Thessaly said. Not just combat capability. Everything. Your endurance metrics, your psychological stress profiles, your tactical doctrines. They'll want to understand what Yael Dagon did and whether it's representative. It is, Chin said. She bled for information, Thessaly said. It kept coming back to that. She couldn't stop turning it over. In Varek martial tradition, you use your body to project power, to demonstrate that the cost of engaging with you is too high. You don't use damage as a research methodology. We have a word for it, Chin said. Actually, we have about 40 words for it, depending on context. The one that fits best is probably, she thought for a moment, investment. Investment, Thessaly repeated. You accept a cost now in exchange for a larger return later. Chin set down her sandwich. Yael took hits she could have avoided because every hit told her something. Hit pattern, forced distribution, which side Dara favored, how she weighted her stance after extended engagement. 6 minutes of paid research. Then, she used the data. She could have been seriously injured. She knew the acceptable risk margin. Ow! Chin looked at her for a moment with an expression that Thessaly was starting to recognize. The one that meant the ambassador was deciding how honest to be, not because honesty was dangerous, but because some truths require the listener to be ready. Because she's done it before, Chin said. Lots of times. In worse rooms. She picked up her sandwich again. The conversation, apparently, was over. Thessaly walked back to her own office and wrote 6 more pages into the document. She'd titled things I was not briefed on. The full assessment request came through conclave channels 3 days later, signed by 11 species representatives, and stamped with the kind of urgency that usually accompanied diplomatic crises rather than membership evaluations. Thessaly delivered it personally. She found Chun in the gymnasium on Deck 9. Not the large one where the challenge had taken place. A smaller training space, just large enough for 2 people. Chun was there with Roshan, and they were doing something that Thessaly's combat assessment subroutine initially registered as hand-to-hand drilling before reclassifying it as something she didn't have a category for. They were fighting, but they were also talking, not in the distracted way that indicated poor discipline. In the focused way that indicated the talking was part of the exercise. Roshan would throw a combination, and Chun, who was 60-something years old and not a large woman, would manage it while apparently discussing something about the 3rd preliminary accords language around resource extraction rights. And then Chun would counter, and Roshan would manage that while responding about the Dalhuri's position on the same issue. They were maintaining a strategic conversation through physical combat. Thessaly stood in the doorway for 30 seconds before either of them noticed her. Chin noticed her first. She stepped back from Roshan, pressed a towel to her face, and said, "Morning. The assessment request. How did you? You don't make personal deliveries unless it's something that warranted its own conversation." Chin took the datapad. "Read it." Handed it to Roshan. 11 signatures. The Sarati are among them. Chun and Roshan exchanged a look. In human facial vocabulary, which Thessaly had been studying intensively for 6 weeks, that look said something. Something that neither of them said out loud. It was the look of 2 people who had worked together long enough to share a whole language in 3 seconds of eye contact. "Okay," Chin said. "What do they want to know?" "Everything," Thessaly said. "Endurance. Stress response. Tactical variance. Psychological breaking points." "Breaking points," Roshan said. He said it with a specific quality of amusement that his translator rendered blandly as mild humor, but which Thessaly, by now, recognized as something drier and considerably more pointed. "They want to know where humans break," Thessaly said. She felt she owed them the honesty. They want to know what it takes to make a human stop. Chun looked at her. Tell them, Chun said, that we'll cooperate fully with the assessment. Then, she went back to training. The conclave's formal assessment team arrived a week later. 7 species, 12 assessors, equipment that could measure biological stress response at the cellular level. They brought Varec endurance protocols, Cerity pain threshold matrices, Dalhuri cognitive pressure evaluations, and 3 tests that had been designed specifically for the human assessment, and that the lead assessor, a Varec physiologist named Orcs, described to Thessaly as calibrated to find the ceiling, meaning to find the point at which humans stopped. They didn't find it. This was not what the assessors expected, and Thessaly, who had been assigned as liaison for the process and therefore watched all of it, watched the assessor's confidence slowly transform into something that she recognized from the inside as the specific discomfort of having your model of the world prove insufficient. The endurance trials were first. The Varec endurance protocol had been developed to assess new species' physical limits without causing lasting damage, a sliding scale of physical demand calibrated to the species' baseline biology. It was designed to bring a subject to approximately 80% of physiological capacity and measure the response. The human delegation offered 6 volunteers, 3 women, 3 men, ranging in age from 26 to 51. They completed the 80% threshold and kept going. The protocol scaled to 90%. They kept going. At 93%, 2 of the 6 showed physiological markers that in any other species preceded system shut down. They didn't stop. Orcs paused the trial to verify the equipment. The equipment was fine. The humans, one of them bleeding from his nose, one of them shaking with what the instruments read as advanced stage physical depletion, were sitting very still and looking at the assessors with that patient, unhurried expression that Thessaly had been seeing on Chin's face for 6 weeks and still couldn't fully parse. Are you in pain? Cass asked the human who was shaking. Yes, the man said. Do you want to stop? A pause. A real one, like he was giving the question genuine consideration. Not particularly, he said. Cass stopped the trial and spent 4 hours writing a report that Thessaly later read 3 times. The relevant section, the humans do not appear to have a standard pain-to-stopping ratio. In all species previously assessed, there is a pain threshold beyond which the survival instinct overrides behavioral control and produces cessation. The human subjects showed no such threshold within the trial parameters. This is not physiological anomaly. This is behavioral choice. They are choosing to continue past the point where continuation is instinctive. We do not currently have a framework for this. The Cerity lead assessor, who communicated exclusively through Thessaly because the Cerity didn't speak directly to anyone they were actively evaluating, sent one sentence. When do they stop? It wasn't a question. The cognitive pressure trials were worse. Not worse for the humans, worse for the assessors. The Dalhuri evaluations were designed to fracture decision-making under extreme stress by introducing cascading information overload combined with physical discomfort and false threat signals, producing a cognitive environment that resembled, in rough terms, being lied to by your own senses while something was trying to kill you. Every species in the conclave had a break point in these trials. The Dalhuri had mapped them all. There was comfort in the Dalhuri collective understanding, in knowing exactly how much it took to overwhelm a mind. The human subjects, again 6 volunteers, different 6 this time, did not fracture in the expected pattern. They adapted. This sounds simple, and it was not. Adaptation under stress wasn't new. Every species did some version of it. But the humans adapted in ways that the Dalhuri model hadn't accounted for. They started narrating out loud, to themselves or to each other, maintaining a running verbal commentary on the false threat signals that seemed to have the effect of the Dalhuri assessor's language here broke down slightly, and its translation algorithm offered 3 alternative renderings before settling on externalizing the noise so the inside stays clear. One of the human women, 60 seconds into the Highest pressure phase of the trial started humming. The assessors paused the trial. Are you experiencing the scenario correctly? The Dalhuri assessor asked. Yes, she said. You are humming. I know. Why? She thought about it. It gives me something to do with the part of my brain that wants to panic, she said. Keeps it busy. The rest of me can work. The Dalhuri assessor was quiet for so long that its translation unit pinged with an inactivity alert. Then, you divided your cognition deliberately. Sure, she said. Hasn't everyone? The assessor looked at Thessaly. Thessaly looked back. No, the assessor said. No one else has. By the third week of assessment, something had shifted in the dynamic of Conclave Station that Thessaly could feel but couldn't yet fully name. It was the quality of attention, she thought. The way the assessors came to observation sessions now. Not with the confident instruments of a team finding a ceiling, but with the focused silence of people who weren't sure what they were going to see and had decided to stop predicting and start watching. Even Commander Vel came. She didn't announce herself. She stood at the back of the observation gallery for the tactical variance trials, the ones where human subjects were given scenarios with no good solutions and told to choose, and she watched, and she was very still in the way that Thessaly had learned over years of working with her meant Vel was learning something that was changing something. The scenarios were not hypothetical. Every scenario in the Conclave assessment database was drawn from real events, real military and diplomatic crises that had actually broken other species. The assessors had selected 12 of them, calibrated for human biological and cognitive parameters. The humans solved 7. Not resolved. Not escaped. Solved. Found outcomes that the assessment parameters had not flagged as possible, because they were outcomes that required accepting a cost, accepting damage, accepting loss, accepting pain, that the models had assumed no rational actor would accept. The models were wrong. After the 11th scenario, in which a human team had found a solution to a resource crisis by simply, and Thessaly was still turning this one over, deciding to need less, the lead Varric assessor turned to Thessaly and said, very quietly, they optimize for different things than we do. Yes, Thessaly said. What do they optimize for? Thessaly thought about Shun saying she bled for a better win. About the man who'd kept going at 93% capacity because he didn't particularly want to stop. About the woman who'd hummed to partition her own panic. I don't think they optimize, she said. I think they endure. And they trust that endurance long enough will produce the outcome. That's not a strategy. No, Thessaly said. It's a philosophy. Commander Vel, at the back of the gallery, said nothing. She was still watching. Her scar, the one she'd never had repaired, the one that meant she was proud of it, caught the observation light and stood out, pale against her darker skin. After a long moment, she said, What was it? 3 wars. Thessaly looked at her. You said, in your briefing file on the human fighter, Vel said, the one who fought Dara. You said she had been in 3 wars. Her file noted 6 years of military service. Thessaly said, I don't have the full count. 3, said Vel. I checked after. She paused. She fought in 3 wars before she was 30. And she came here, and when I sent my best warrior against her, her first thought was, what can I learn from this? The gallery was quiet. Not how do I survive, Vel said. Not how do I win fast. What can I learn? She let that sit. Then, how many wars has your species fought, Ambassador? Total. In all your recorded history. Thessaly opened her mouth. Vel shook her head. Don't answer that. Ask them. She left the gallery. Thessaly stood there for a moment, alone with the observation window and the assessment chamber below, where the human team was already being briefed on Scenario 12. She watched them settle into their seats, watched them listen to the parameters, watched the small economy of glances between them, the shorthand communication of people who had worked together in bad rooms, and come out the other side. Then, she pulled up the historical database for Earth. Total armed conflicts in recorded human history. Approximate asterisk the search returned a number. She read it twice. She closed the file and opened a new message to Varric High Command, and she wrote, for the second time, a report she expected them to initially dismiss. The human assessment is not complete. Asterisk, she wrote. Asterisk, but I can already tell you one thing with certainty. We have been measuring the wrong things. We have been trying to find where they break. The correct question, the one we should have been asking from the beginning, is not where do they break. It is, how many times have they already broken, and why are they still here? Asterisk, she sent it. Then she went to find Ambassador Chun because she had the specific and growing suspicion that Chun had known from the moment the shuttle docked 6 weeks ago exactly how this assessment was going to go. And she wanted to know what you were supposed to do with that. Chun was in the greenhouse on deck 12. Thessaly hadn't known there was a greenhouse on deck 12. The station's directory listed it as auxiliary atmospheric processing, which was technically accurate, and also entirely failed to convey that someone had requisitioned 16 square meters of grow lights and soil and was maintaining what appeared to be a collection of earth plants in various stages of arguing with the station's humidity controls. Chun was watering something small and green and stubborn looking. I was wondering when you'd come find me, she said, without turning around. You knew I would. You've been watching us for 7 weeks, Chun said. You're a thorough person. Eventually you were going to stop watching and start asking. She set down the watering vessel, a battered tin thing she'd apparently brought from Earth, and turned around. Sit down. There's a stool. There was, in fact, a stool. Thessaly sat on it. How many wars, she said. It wasn't really a question. She'd read the number. Depends on your definition, Chun said. She pulled a dead leaf off the small, stubborn plant. If you mean formal declared conflicts between recognized state entities, you get a smaller number. If you mean any organized armed conflict resulting in mass casualties, the number gets very large very fast. Thousands, Thessaly said. We've been human for about 300,000 years, Chun said. Give or take. So yes, thousands. And you're still here. And we're still here. Thessaly looked at the plant. It had the quality of something that had been transported a long way and was aggressively refusing to find that relevant. I wrote to my high command, she said. I told them we've been measuring the wrong things. What are the right things? That's what I came to ask you. Chun was quiet for a moment. She pulled up the second stool. There was a second stool hidden behind a tray of seedlings and sat down across from Thessaly with the specific posture of a woman who was about to say something she'd been waiting to say for 7 weeks. You've been trying to find our ceiling, Chun said. The point where we stop. The point where the damage exceeds our willingness to continue. She folded her hands in her lap. That's a reasonable thing to measure. It's how you understand any system. You find its limits. We haven't found them, Thessaly said. No, Chun said. You won't. She paused. Not because we don't have them. We do. Every human breaks, eventually. We're not invincible. We're not even particularly durable. Physically, your Varec baseline outperforms ours in almost every direct measurement. She said this the way she said everything, which was matter-of-factly, without defensiveness. What you can't find with your instruments is the thing that determines when we break. Because it's not a physical variable. What is it? Chun looked at her. Whether we think it's worth it, she said. The greenhouse was very quiet. Somewhere a grow light buzzed. That's it, Chun said. That's the whole answer. A human being in pain, under threat, depleted. The only question that determines whether they stop is whether they believe the thing they're doing is worth continuing. If they do, they continue. Past the point where it's comfortable. Past the point where it's reasonable. Past the point where any external observer would say, stop. You've done enough. They continue. She paused. And if they don't, if they decide it isn't worth it, no physical capability in the universe keeps them going. The body gives up when the person gives up. Thessaly turned this over. So your limitation isn't physical, she said. Our limitation is meaning, Chun said. Same as it's always been. Thessaly brought this back to Commander Vel. She didn't phrase it as a report. She sat in Vel's office, a space that was mostly bare metal and had exactly one decoration, a framed image of a woman Thessaly didn't recognize holding a young child, and told her what Chun had said. Vel listenet. She had the focused quality of a warrior being briefed, which meant she was listening with all of her. When Thessaly finished, Vel was quiet for a long time. Meaning, she said finally. She said their limitation is meaning. Whether the individual believes the thing they're doing is worth continuing. And who decides that? The individual. Vel was quiet again. Then, in Varek martial culture, the warrior's limit is defined by the hierarchy. You continue until the commander says stop, or until the body stops you. You do not decide yourself when the cost is too high. She said it without apology. It was simply how it was. The hierarchy holds a decision because individual judgment under extreme stress is compromised. You cannot trust your own assessment when you are broken. The humans seem to, Thessaly said. Yes, Vel said. I noticed. She stood up, walked to the viewport in her office, Deck 4, looking out onto the station's outer hull and the star field beyond. Dara asked me something, she said. After the match. She didn't turn around. She asked, if the human had been fighting for a cause she believed in rather than a training exercise, what would she have been capable of? Thessaly didn't answer. She had the feeling the question wasn't for her. I told her I didn't know, Vel said. I had never seen a fighter whose capacity scaled with belief rather than physiology. She was quiet for a moment. I've been thinking about it since. She turned around. The humans have fought thousands of wars, she said, against each other. They have broken themselves and rebuilt. They have ended civilizations and started them again. They have survived plagues that killed half their species. They have survived ice ages. They have survived, she paused, and in the pause was something that Thessaly recognized as a warrior adjusting a previous assessment, themselves. They have survived themselves over and over across 300,000 years without going extinct. She met Thessaly's eyes. Do you know what that requires? Tell me. It requires that every time they broke, every time a civilization fell, every time they lost, enough of them believed it was still worth continuing. Not because the odds were good, not because survival was guaranteed, because they decided. She said the last word like she was still getting used to the weight of it. They decided to continue. Individual by individual, across hundreds of thousands of years, billions of people made the choice to keep going when stopping would have been easier. The starfield outside the viewport was very still. We are afraid of species with larger ships, Vel said, with stronger bodies, with better weapons. She looked at Thessaly. We have never, in all our history, encountered a species whose primary military asset is the decision to continue. Is that what it is? Thessaly asked. A military asset? Vel was quiet for a moment. I don't know what to call it, she said. I have been a warrior for 40 years. I have never had a word for it. She touched the scar on her face, unconsciously, the one she was proud of. I think maybe it doesn't have one. Not in our language. The formal assessment concluded on a Tuesday. The report was 1,100 pages, which was the longest assessment document the Conclave had produced for any species since the Cerati, and the Cerati were 3,000 years old. The summary, which was the part that circulated that got discussed in the galactic feed, that prompted the KFAA to produce a new bioluminescent pattern that had no previous name and had to be created for the occasion, was 7 paragraphs. The final paragraph read, in Conclave standard language, the human species presents no immediate threat to Conclave stability. However, the assessment team recommends that the Conclave proceed with the formal assumption that human potential scales in ways that current metrics are inadequate to measure. Specifically, humans demonstrate a capacity for continued function under conditions that would produce cessation in any other assessed species, and this capacity appears to be determined not by physiology, but by individual and collective belief in the purpose of continuing action. The implications of this for long-term strategic assessment are significant and are not fully understood at this time. We recommend expedited full membership consideration, not as a formality, but as a practical matter. It is strategically preferable to have this species as partners than as an unknown quantity. Asterisk Ambassador Chen read the summary over her morning coffee and didn't say anything for a long moment. Roshan, sitting across from her, said, "Told you. You didn't tell me anything," she said. I told you the Sarati were going to be the ones who got it first, he said. You said the quiet ones always get it. That's not the same as a specific prediction. Close enough. Chun set down the summary, looked out the viewport of her office at the stars, at the station's external architecture, at the small distant sun that wasn't the one she was from. Vel asked for a meeting, she said. I know. Yael mentioned. Yael mentioned? They've been training together, he said. Mornings, Deck 9. Dara 2. Chun looked at him. Vel's warrior, Dara, reached out to Yael, he said. 3 days after the match. Asked if she'd be willing to keep working. He paused. Yael said yes. Obviously. Chun was quiet for a moment. How was it going? According to Yael, Roshan said, Dara fights like a wall and learns like a sponge. Her words. He took a sip of his own coffee. He'd acquired the station's closest equivalent, which was a pale imitation and which he drank with the resigned loyalty of someone who has made their peace with a substitute. Also, Dara apparently told Vel that fighting Yael was the most educational 6 minutes of her career. How did Vel take that? She started attending the training sessions. Chun picked up her coffee. Set up the meeting, she said. The meeting with Commander Vel happened the following morning in the same gymnasium on Deck 9, where it had all begun. Thessaly attended as liaison, which was her official function, and also by this point a thin cover for the fact that she simply wanted to be in the room. Vel was already there. Dara was beside her. Yael was across from them, with a new bruise on her jaw from that morning's training that she apparently found unremarkable. Chun stood slightly behind Yael, in the posture she used when she was content to let someone else lead and be available for support, a posture that Thessaly had initially read as deference and had long since reclassified as precision. The assessment is done, Vel said. It was not a question. Yes, Chun said. The conclave will vote on membership within a month. We expect so. Vel looked at Chun for a long moment. The quality of the look was different from their first meeting. The first meeting had been an assessment, measuring, categorizing, fitting the observed data into existing models. This was something else. This was a warrior who had updated her model and was now looking at the world it produced. I owe you something, Vel said. You don't, Chun said. I made an assumption, Vel said. When I sent Dara to fight your warrior, I assumed we were establishing hierarchy. That's what the challenge was from our perspective. Establishing who stands where, demonstrating the order of things. She paused. That's not what it was for you. No, Chun said. What was it for you? Chun was quiet for a moment, and in the quiet, Thessaly watched her decide again how honest to be and arrive at the same answer she always arrived at. An introduction, Chun said. You want to know what we do when it hurts. We wanted you to see. She looked at Vel steadily. Not to impress you. Not to establish hierarchy, to be known, to have you see us clearly, as we actually are, rather than as whatever a file says. Vel absorbed this. You bled to be understood, she said. We've been doing that for 300,000 years, Chun said. It came out quiet, without drama, without the weight of a prepared line. It was just the truth, stated plainly the way the coffee thing was a truth. Just a fact about them. It's worked out mostly. The gymnasium was very still. Vel looked at Dara. Dara, who had spent the last 3 weeks training with Yael Dagon, who had come in every morning and taken hits and given them and learned and adjusted and asked questions with the specific hunger of a warrior who had encountered something she didn't have a complete theory for. Dara looked back at Vel with an expression that in Varic facial language meant asterisk yes. This is correct. I have found this to be true. Asterisk Vel turned back to Chun. I want to propose something, she said. Formally. To be included in the membership proceedings. She stood differently than she'd stood at the start of this. Something had shifted in the posture, not deference, not softness, but something more like recalibration. An exchange. Varec warrior training integrated with human military doctrine. Permanent. Ongoing. Both sides contributing, both sides learning. Chun looked at Yael. Yael looked at Dara. Something passed between them. The shorthand of two people who had spent 3 weeks hitting each other in a small room and arrived, somehow, at something other than enmity. We need to define the terms, Yael said. Yes, Doris said. Her voice was deeper than Chen's, carrying the resonance of the Varrock homeworld's higher gravity, but the word came out with the specific weight of someone who has already decided and is now discussing logistics. We would. Then, we discussed terms, Vel said. She looked at Thessaly. Ambassador, I think you should be present for this. Thessaly, who had been writing notes in the margin of her mental document things I was not briefed on and had arrived somewhere around page 40, looked up. Yes, she said. I think I should. The membership vote passed 7 weeks later. 22 species, unanimous, which had happened twice before in conclave history, and not for 3,000 years. Thessaly watched the feed in her office. The cafe lit up in a pattern that the new translation algorithm, updated specifically in the weeks since the assessment to account for what one of the network's theorists had described as an entire new emotional category, rendered as something we did not have a word for, and now must. The Dalhuri clustermind issued a single statement. Asterisk, we are pleased. We note that the humans were never trying to impress us. We find this the most impressive thing about them. Asterisk, the Cerati said nothing. But the 3 senior Cerati tacticians who had extended their stay by 3 weeks had extended it again by 6 months, and they attended every training session between Dara and Yael, standing in the observation gallery with the stillness of people who were watching something they intended to understand completely before they said a single word about it. Commander Vel sent Thessaly a message that evening. No hither, no greeting. My warriors train with blades because blades fail. My warriors train without blades because the weapon can always be taken away. What you cannot take away, what Yael Dagon demonstrated in this gymnasium, and what every human in every trial demonstrated, is the thing inside that decides to continue. I spent 40 years building a warrior caste on the principle that you demonstrate power, so no one tests it. I am revising that principle, not because it is wrong, because there is something older and stranger and much more difficult to counter, and it has just joined the conclave. Asterisk, Thessaly read it twice. Then, she forwarded it to Chun with a note attached. Asterisk from Commander Vel. No further context provided. I believe it is intended as respect. Asterisk Chin's response arrived 11 minutes later. Tell her we're glad she sees us. Tell her we see her too. Asterisk, and below that, added as an afterthought, the way all the most important things seem to arrive with Chun. Casually, without ceremony, as if they were just facts about the world. That's usually where it starts. Asterisk the greenhouse on deck 12. The small stubborn plant from Earth. Thessaly visited it 3 days after the vote. She didn't know why. She just walked there, stood in the doorway, and looked at the plant under its grow lights, in its appropriated soil, in its station that wasn't its home, aggressively continuing to exist. It had grown slightly since she'd first seen it. New leaves, pale green, unsteady, pointing at the artificial sun with the specific confidence of something that had decided, with no particular fanfare, to keep going. She stood there for a while. She thought about 300,000 years, about thousands of wars, about the number she'd looked up and then looked away from and then looked up again because she needed to hold it clearly, about a woman who'd bled for 6 minutes in order to understand more completely, about the thing inside that decides to continue when the body says stop and the odds say stop and the whole weight of accumulated damage says stop, about a species that had survived themselves, over and over, without going extinct. She reached out and touched the leaf of the small plant, gently, the way you'd acknowledge something that had done something difficult and hadn't made a performance of it. Behind her, the grow light buzzed. The plant, unremarkably, continued to grow.